course, this is a portrait of a disaster, a catastrophe. So one of the first things that we see, right, are the myriad of bodies, right, that we're not sure if all of them are necessarily dead or wounded, but certainly you see the suffering. So this person here, clearly there's blood coming out of at least, his mouth. So, and the eyes are open, so we assume this is somebody who's wounded, versus this woman here whose eyes are closed and she's laying down. We assume that she's dead, right? And so you have a mixture of folks who are wounded and folks who are dead, like up here, right? You even have this sort of Monsignor character who's laying down, who's dead, and that speaks to a specific site in Port-au-Prince, the cathedral that was destroyed, which had been really a major feature of the capital, and certainly, even the symbolic funeral of Martin Luther King Jr. was celebrated, or not celebrated, right, but was officiated in this cathedral, right? So it's a very important site, and it was destroyed in the earthquake. You also see on this end, right, a mother who's holding her child, right? And so we see clear signs of death and suffering. At the same time, we see that there are folks who are helping one another, right? Rescuing one another, transporting bodies, nursing others who are wounded, right? So we also see signs of care. It's a kind of language we use a lot in the States these days, especially after COVID, right? Mutual aid, right? People coming to one another's rescue. And this is particularly important because all of the images coming out of Haiti at the moment of the earthquake was concentrated on rescue missions that were specifically targeting international folks living in Haiti. And we'll talk a little bit more later about those types of dynamics and who these international people even are in Haiti and why they receive the attention. But what did happen was that Haitian people themselves were lifting up the rubble with their bare hands to save people. And that's part of the story that you don't hear, right, in dominant media. And that's an important piece to, again, how Haitians continually, in the face of disaster, provide their own solutions. And that's generally what I try to capture in my work, that yes, you have the backdrop of disaster, but if you look more closely, you'll also see very beautiful expressions, right, of humanness, which is this form of mutual aid, of really helping one another out. You even see, though the food probably is there as a sign of offering to the lois, but also, right, that people are putting together their resources to respond to this disaster. And if you know anything about Haitian culture, particularly thinking about the folks who, before Port-au-Prince became this massive city, had been living in the rural areas, and we'll talk more about the history of Port-au-Prince specifically, because this earthquake happens and mostly destroys Port-au-Prince and some parts of the south of Haiti, but certainly this was really concentrated in the capital, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why. But what happens is that people are bringing their cultural practices from outside of the city into the city, and it's something that folks, there are many names that have been given to this form of mutual aid, but Kanpe really is the one that most Haitians will recognize, and scholars of Haiti have really popularized outside of Haiti. And this Kanpe way of being and doing and relating is very much, right, that your well-being is my well-being, right, that I put in labor now because I will receive your labor later, right, and it's a continual exchange, and it also maps onto a future, right? That we are going to be in this relationship with one another forever. It's not just the moment of disaster, but it's community building over time, right? So there's a projected future embedded in the logic of Kombit. And we could talk about the relationship of Kombit to Vodou as a general, not just religion, but way of life, right? And that these are certain key principles, right? If you would want labor principles of Vodou. And so you have, again, right, disaster, suffering, but certainly also the mutual aid piece, the Kombit piece. Also for me is that as you see that the cathedral with, right, the Monsignor has been destroyed and he's dead. The Église de Dieu represents, right, the Protestants, and you also see that their leader has died, right? Of course, there are many, many Protestant churches, and it's not a centralized religion, then there are different currents within Protestantism, but Église de Dieu stands out because it's a significant important current of Protestantism in Haiti, right? So those two things are destroyed, and yet, right, Grann Brijit is in the middle. She's probably, right, the largest character there, and she's obviously doing well, and she's alive, right? And I think this is really important, especially now that I know that Myrlande put this piece together a year and a day later, that she's also making an assessment of what's happened after this moment and the importance of Vodou as a response to the disaster, and that it's continuing to thrive. And this is important because a lot of folks were concerned about whether Vodou was going to be eroded after the earthquake because of the international interpretation of the earthquake as some sort of sign by God that something was wrong with Haiti. And Vodou in particular became a site of attack, right? So for Myrlande to be able to put this beautiful work together and make Vodou very central is also a testament of the strength and resilience, right, of Vodou. And I think the reason also that it's in the middle is sort of bridges between, and this is a thing about Vodou that I think is probably for me the most powerful, is that life and death aren't these separate things, right? That in fact those two things overlap. Death is a natural part of life. And so for it to be right there in the middle in Grann Brijit as a Guédé, and the Guédé represent, or the lois of death, if you will, is a way to reconcile, right, the suffering with the release from suffering, right? And so I think that's, when I look at it and why Brijit is in the middle, it tells me, right, that we have to think beyond just the disaster and think about the marriage of death and life together.